This is The National. Smoked out in BC. Wildfires have more people on the run, and once they're out of danger, then what?
We're just kind of at a loss as to where to go, and kids are scared and the pets are scared.
Around the world, Venezuelans hold a symbolic vote against corruption.
We're up to here with what's going on in Venezuela, all the death, all the hunger.
Plus, an exclusive interview with the commissioner who resigned this week from the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
Is there an action plan? Because just a report to go on the shelf with my beautiful collection of reports on Indigenous people, I'm not happy with that.
Raging wildfires, choking clouds of acrid smoke, and thousands of people on the move. That's the situation in British Columbia's southern interior tonight. Many evacuation orders have been issued, including for Williams Lake and its surrounding area. That region has a permanent population of more than 20,000 people, many of whom are now pouring into Kamloops, normally about a 3-hour drive southeast, but one made much longer because of the traffic bottleneck. It's where Briar Stewart begins our coverage.
Weary and worried, they lined up in Kamloops today after fleeing by the thousands throughout the night.
We packed last Friday expecting to go that day, right?
Even and then give you the order, you're not ready.
No, you're not. You're still panicking.
These are our 2 dogs.
Particularly when you're traveling with a full van.
So we have these guys here.
Not to mention the 4 kittens and 2 cats who also made the trip from Williams Lake. The city had been on alert for days, but the fire, whipped up by strong gusts of winds, jumped the Fraser River yesterday. Residents were ordered to evacuate.
That's what they've been using to sleep in.
Gary Bennett says he started hitchhiking out on Friday, walking along the highway until someone picked him up.
Those flames are like 30 feet high. And I thought I wasn't actually going to get out that one time because it was all around me.
Williams Lake may have been the largest city to be evacuated so far, but the biggest fire actually began in Ashcroft. It rapidly and violently moved north.
Oh my God! There's where we used to live.
On Friday, the fire swept into the waterfront community of Loon Lake. There's no estimate on how many properties have been lost because it's not safe enough yet for officials to take a closer look.
We're hearing rumors about the lake, but until I see it with my own eyes, I'm not really paying attention to what the rumors are.
Yesterday, while so much of the attention was on the central interior, a grass fire was sparked in the Okanagan. It quickly grew, enveloping homes perched on a hill in lake country. Across the province, there are more than a dozen fires threatening communities.
We have hundreds of firefighters from across Canada supplementing our 1,300 men and women. We have personnel and assets now coming in from other countries.
Because this frenetic pace could continue. Even in areas where people have not been ordered out, some are choosing to turn on their sprinklers and leave.
We're not evacuated yet, we're just on the alert, but you know, it's going to be not very long, there's going to be nowhere to go.
Because the province is parched and the fire season could stretch on for at least another 2 months. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Kamloops.
Now, Briar will be back in a second, but up the highway to Prince George, people there are playing an agonizing waiting game. Hundreds of people have no idea when they'll get to go home or if they even still have a home. And as Cameron McIntosh reports, it could be a long time before they find out.
Riffing on the blues is helping Rick Matthews deal with the stress.
I'm talking about adjusting to the situation, and that's the first priority.
He and his family have been camped out on the parking lot of the Prince George Evacuee Registration Center for a week.
We have to wrap our heads around the fact that it could be till the end of fire season.
Prior to the evacuation order, more than 7,000 people from the Williams Lake area had already come here to Prince George to register as evacuees. And now more people are coming. Thoughts are shifting to the long term. This university dorm building has just been converted into a personal care home.
We figured it out now that we were able to set this up and have it running fairly smoothly within a matter of a week.
Meanwhile, Prince George has recruited a volunteer army of hundreds. Disasters like the Fort McMurray fire led City Council here to plan for a situation like this.
You're ready to go, but you're tweaking it just to make it better because things come up that you don't even think of.
All of it's pretty overwhelming for families just arriving.
We're just kind of at a loss as to where to go, and kids are scared and the pets are scared.
Or those like Rainer Fadish, who says there's a good chance his house is gone.
Picked up my kids and my dogs and we left, right? The left side from our property was all on fire already.
Just the sort of uncertainty Rick Matthews has had a whole week to chew on.
The big question you asked just then is what is going to happen now?
You don't know?
I have no idea.
And right now it's shaping up to look like it's going to be a very long and a very worrisome wait. Certainly a situation he doesn't want to be in and that no one here wants to be in. Andrew?
Okay, Cameron. Now, hold tight, because I want to bring Briar Stewart back into this conversation from Kamloops. And Briar, you were talking about the size and intensity of some of those fires. What are you hearing about the containment battle? Are firefighters actually getting anywhere?
Well, Andrew, I think it's hard to overstate just what a challenge it is for firefighters. I mean, many of these fires are partially contained, but you have two things working here. I mean, you have these dry conditions, which makes it very easy for a new fire to start, and then you have all this wind, which is really fueling the rapid growth of fires that have been burning for days. In fact, yesterday in certain areas, things got so bad that officials had to withdraw fire crews from certain areas because there were concerns about their personal safety. I think you also have to remember that this is a relatively large geographic area that we're dealing with. I mean, these fires aren't just clustered around each other. So even though you have almost 3,000 people working on the fires and 200 aircraft in the air, that number has to be divided out among all the different fires that crews are currently battling.
Right. And Cameron, I think of all the hard work being put into caring for the evacuees that are already there. What happens if more come? Can they handle that?
Well, here in Prince George, they say that they can. In fact, several hundred came today. We don't have a firm number still being counted. People are still arriving. You see people walk back and forth behind me here. So they're still trying to figure out exactly how many people they have had come through here. Now, when we talk about the 7,000 people that had come through prior to the Williams Lake evacuation order, doesn't necessarily mean that they're all here at one time or that they're all in one shelter. People have been kind of rotating through. They come through here, they get registered, they basically become accounted for, they start to qualify for evacuee benefits, that sort of thing, and then perhaps they move on. Maybe they go to a family or a friend's place. So that number is somewhat fluid. It doesn't mean that 7,000 are all being cared for at once. So yeah, there is capacity here, and the mayor of the community is saying that no one will be turned away.
Okay, Cam McIntosh in Prince George and Briar Stewart in Kamloops. Thanks so much to the two of you. Now, we want to give you a sense of the scale of what's happening in BC and exactly what firefighters and emergency workers are up against. More than 160 active fires are burning right now, some out of control. And of those, more than 20 are at least 1,000 hectares in size. Or, put another way, more than 1,000 pro baseball fields put together. These are the big ones, often directly threatening communities. And some fires are even bigger than that, at least 10 times that size. Now, in Italy, fire crews are scrambling against a very similar situation: soaring temperatures and spreading wildfires. Water bombers continue to give air support to crews on the ground, but when the temperature climbs above 40 degrees, it's tough work. According to local reports, there are fires burning right across the country, from the northeast to the south, and 2 people died defending their property from the fires earlier this week. Coming up, Marilyn Patra breaks her silence after quitting the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
When I felt like my integrity was being questioned, I couldn't do it.
Plus, Trevor Noah tells Wendy what it was like to be born a crime. Well, Donald Trump lashed out today at the media and pollsters, but the daily drip of revelations about his son's effort to get campaign help from the Russian government is now subsiding. The White House has an opportunity to change the subject. This week is being billed as Made in America Week, with the administration expected to unveil its wish list for renegotiating NAFTA. And as Lindsay Duncombe tells us, Canada is doing more than just watching.
The worst trade deal ever signed.
The president's words have been scathing, his tone harsh.
NAFTA, whether it's Mexico or Canada, is a disaster for our country.
But what exactly does Donald Trump want to do with NAFTA? We'll get a clearer sense tomorrow. The Trump administration is expected to present a framework for negotiations to Congress. The on-paper official plan is especially important, experts say, because when it comes to trade, the president doesn't seem to know what he's talking about.
His overall view of trade is basically wrong and far too simplistic.
The tone of the document will be an early indication of whether Ottawa's extensive outreach is working, targeting border states, members of Congress, industry players. The Trudeau government has been pitching a NAFTA tweak, not an overhaul. That's the message the Prime Minister delivered to U.S. governors on Friday.
We think it should be updated and modernized, as it has been a dozen times over the past quarter century.
It's not just Canada saying that. American industries from autos to agriculture have urged the White House not to mess too much with NAFTA, given the millions of American jobs at stake. And Trump is unlikely to want to get on the bad side of big business.
He's really, in the end, not going to do anything that's massively disruptive to corporate America.
But there could be some tough talk on Canadian dairy, especially calls for country of origin requirements in the automotive sector, and, less controversially, a plan to make it easier for tech workers to have cross-border careers.
So a little bit of updating, a little polishing, I think it is a good thing, and my guess is not going to go a lot further than that.
A successful renegotiation may end up being all about perception. Small changes the president can pass off as big ones. This week's policy reveal is really just the beginning. Official negotiations are expected to start next month. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Washington.
Every day, the headlines out of Venezuela seem to get darker. Food shortages, deadly political clashes, and its president pushing for new powers to, in his words, neutralize the opposition. But the response from that opposition today was vast and felt, even here in Canada. Lorenda Redekop explains.
It's an unusual form of protest, a symbolic referendum asking voters whether they oppose the constitutional changes planned by Venezuela's president. Opposition supporters blame the government for skyrocketing inflation and shortages of food and medicine. They've already protested in the streets every day for more than 3 months, where close to 100 people have died. There was more violence at today's protest. A shooting killed 1 person and wounded 3 others. Outside the polling station in Toronto, waiting to vote turned into a celebration. Venezuelan expats are voting in countries around the world.
We're up to here with what's going on in Venezuela.
Venezuelan people will be on the street celebrating. There is no other way for those guys but to abandon the power.
This voting station is one of 18 in cities all across the country. An organizer told me that she is overwhelmed by this response. Already in the first 2 hours, 1,000 people had marked a ballot, and it is still packed in here with a lineup right outside the door. But don't expect to find any government supporters here.
Me vote in a plebiscite that is outside of the law?
Maria Pais Victor calls it a political stunt to gain media attention.
They're doing this to gain the international support against the demonization of Venezuela's government.
In 2 weeks, it'll be the government holding an official and binding vote to elect members to change the Constitution. Lorenda Redekop, CBC News, Toronto.
The inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls has been plagued by criticism, much of it coming from Indigenous families who don't believe in the process. Betty Rourke lost a daughter in 2013 and a sister back in 1980. She has a few suggestions for what the commission could do differently and what's worked so far. Erin Broman reports.
This is my a beautiful gift from my daughter, Jennifer.
This blanket provides comfort to Betty Rourke. It was knitted by her daughter, Jennifer McPherson. She received it 2 days before Jennifer's husband murdered her in BC in 2013.
A very kind, gentle, soft-spoken woman.
Rourke's sister, Jennifer Johnston, was also killed in 1980. Rourke has been waiting to share both their stories, but she's been losing faith in the process.
This national inquiry is like a farce to me and my family and other family members. It's all about money.
There's nothing we can do to change it.
She watched the hearings as they unfolded in Whitehorse in May and June. Families were sworn in before they told their story. A legal process, Rourke says, at odds with the culture.
Why do I have to be sworn in and made like I'm on trial here?
She wants the Prime Minister to appoint a new commissioner, someone who's lost a loved one.
Who most can educate them is one of our family members.
She'd also like to see more guidance from elders in the process and more training for police on how to interact with Indigenous people. Her own grief for her daughter hasn't subsided.
I see my children, my surviving children. They're hurting.
As part of her healing journey, Rourke confronted her daughter's murderer in jail in 2015.
I'm very hurt. What you did to my daughter, I'll never see her again. But I still forgive you because that's my peace.
She says she wants the same peace for other families. And though the inquiry is flawed, it's still functional.
Every time we tell our story, it's healing. You know, we become stronger.
Erin Roman, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And stay tuned for more on the inquiry. Marilyn Poitras resigned as a commissioner for the inquiry, has kept silent until now. Her exclusive interview with Duncan McHugh is next.
You can't just sit back and play with your own little world. There are other worlds out there. Lots of them. And you can't just ignore them or brush them aside. You see, the world you know is really made up of lots of other worlds, and all of them have their own problems, which, in fact, become your problems. And worlds aren't made up simply of problems. Good things happen, exciting things, and they all affect you. The thing is to understand what's happening. And to understand, you have to have a complete and comprehensive view of matters. And where to get this information? It's easy. The national news, nightly, on CBC Television. So welcome other worlds into your life. It's almost fun. The national news.
5 nights a week in the national newsroom of CBC Television, the stories come in from all parts of the world to be interpreted and prepared for use on The National. The facts are checked and the backgrounds gathered. On-the-spot reports are collected. Then the films and the tapes are evaluated and edited, readied for the air. CBC's correspondents in all corners of the world report and interpret the news. Wherever things are happening, you'll get the complete information right here on CBC Television.
I'm Warren Davis. Those are just some of the things that go into The National. Join me.
From here, each day at 1 o'clock, Canada is given the exact time. 60 Canadian radio stations relay the signal to the nation.
The CBC brings you the Dominion Observatory official time signal. The beginning of the long dash, which follows 10 seconds of silence, will indicate exactly 1 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. One o'clock Eastern Daylight Time.
Families want to prevent this tragedy such that other families don't have to go through this. That is the purpose of this inquiry.
The inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls was launched last August. It was one of Justin Trudeau's key promises during the 2015 election campaign. But tonight, we're taking a look at what went wrong. At first, there were high hopes.
No relationship is more important to me and to Canada than the one with First Nations, Métis Nation, and Inuit peoples.
Finally, an acknowledgement that Indigenous lives of girls and women matter.
Now, much of that hope has turned to anger and despair. The inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls was supposed to be the start of a healing journey. But now, 5 staff members gone, a commissioner resigned, and families are left wondering if anyone is really listening. Chief Commissioner Marion Buller says there's nothing wrong.
The inquiry was on track and still is on track.
But several community groups and organizations have turned their backs, saying they won't support this inquiry.
The national inquiry in its current form is not hearing the voices.
Marilyn Petra was a commissioner. She stepped down this week, and Duncan McHugh sat down with her in Saskatoon.
Marilyn, thank you so much for making time for us.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. So you became a commissioner for the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women about 10 months ago, and you felt like it was the beginning of a healing journey, being involved in the inquiry. Now you've resigned. How are you feeling?
Feeling mixed emotions. I feel that it was a right decision. I don't have regrets. I feel good about the decision that I made. I'm sad that it had to be that way, and there's so many people hopeful about the commission, and so that brings a lot of sadness out.
I'm assuming and imagining that it was a really tough decision for you. Was there a moment that it crystallized, I have to resign?
It's been coming for a few months, but I wanted to wait. Am I missing something? Have I not tried something? Is there a way that that I think this commission could go down a road that I was hoping we were going to go down, and I just couldn't find one. And so in the end, being in a meeting and hearing from my colleagues that the commission was spiritually grounded and we were guided by elders regularly, and that for me was a moment of, for me that's not the case, that's not my experience with the commission, and I couldn't sit in the room and say that that is my experience anymore. And so when I felt like my integrity was being questioned, I couldn't do it.
What's your concern? What's your main concern? Why did you resign?
My main concern is that this commission is going down a tried road. We've been studied, we've been researched, we've gone and looked at Indians and half-breeds and Inuit people for a long time to see what's the problem. You tell us your sad story and we'll figure out what to do with you, and we're headed down that same path. And if it worked, we would all be so fixed and healthy by now. It doesn't work. And so how do we change the trajectory of this commission and get it to go down a path where people in the communities are included in that resolution, in that solution finding? And I couldn't see that happening with the hearing process.
There has been a lot of concern expressed by families about the communication gap between the inquiry and the families of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Why isn't the commission connecting?
We need to be engaged with community in ways that say, what does it look like to be on the street? What are the issues? We had people tell us straight up that if you want to know sort of who the problems are and how to fix them, you go talk to the sex trade workers. They're going to tell you who they are. This is not a mystery. This isn't sort of some person coming out of the blue and randomly taking women off the street. People know who they're threatened by. Let's go talk to them. We weren't doing any of those things.
There have been several staffers now that have left, including the executive director and now yourself, lots of Canadians are looking and saying, what's going on there? Why are people leaving?
People, it doesn't matter where you work, people need to feel like their voice is included, that they're recognized, that their fingerprints are on the work that they're deeply committed to. And I don't think that people are feeling that.
What were the key things you were disagreeing on?
We were disagreeing on, for example, the rollout of the hearing schedule. Why are we choosing 9? Where's that number coming from? What's the budget for that? How much money did we spend in Whitehorse? Where is the list for institutional hearings? Where are those hearings going to be? One of the components that's key that was constructed early in the process was we were going to hear from experts. Can we see the expert list? So I wanted to put the family hearings and the institutional hearings and the expert hearings all in sequence and see where are we going to go, who are we going to hear from, how is this going to roll out. And I wanted budgets attached to each of those. And I didn't have all of that information, and so I wasn't prepared to go ahead with that.
There have been some reports that your resignation is all about friction. It's about friction between you and other commissioners. What's your response to that?
My resignation is because I needed to sleep at night about where I thought this commission was going and what I thought it could do.
So what are we going to learn? If this inquiry continues as it's going, what are we going to learn that we don't already know?
I'm not sure what you're going to learn that you don't already know. Some specifics of some people's stories that maybe haven't been told. There's a lot of stories out there right now that you already know about. That's the most I can give you. So I'm walking away because I don't see that that's helpful. Whether I get along with my colleagues every day or not, I don't even think my colleagues and I have an expectation that we're going to get along every day, because there are days we get along and days that we don't get along. At the end of the day, are we coming up with solutions? Are they community driven? And is there an action plan? Because just a report to go on the shelf with my beautiful collection of reports on Indigenous people, I'm not happy with that.
There are families of missing and murdered Indigenous women who pushed and pushed and pushed for this to happen. They may be watching and listening to this, listening to you. What's your message to them?
My message to them is, you're amazing. We heard from amazing women. The strength of the Indigenous women in our communities is amazing. The reason this inquiry exists in the first place is because a bunch of mums and grandmas got up, aunties and daughters, and said, no more. You will take our people seriously. Our women are just as important as anybody else's women, and it's right now the one that's standing out in my mind is a woman in the north who stood up in a courtroom and told the judge and the defense counsel and the Crown Counsel to stop calling her sister a hooker and to use her name. She has a family and she's loved, and people are grieving her loss, and that's amazing, and that's taking back and reclaiming. And so it's really important that they push this. It's really important that the inquiry is coming to fruition at all, and it's important internationally because we're not the only people that are suffering.
The Chief Commissioner, Marion Buller-Bennett, said things are not drifting when she was asked this question. Things are not drifting, we're proceeding. When you hear that, what's your answer?
I think that things are going exactly in the direction she wants them to go, where there's going to be hearings, and they'll come up with a list of institutions eventually and locations.
But I mean, 4 resignations of key staff, resignation of a commissioner, and things are not drifting?
I guess I'm not, I guess we need to have a debate about what drifting means. I think yeah, there's been some pretty key people step down. There's going to be a few more people step down, and there's going to be some people that stay, that feel truly that they want to make a difference. It's difficult work, and we haven't figured out the internal communication mechanism to make people feel heard internally. and it's reflected out, and people don't feel heard externally either. And
Prime Minister Trudeau really raised a lot of hopes when he began saying that there's no more important relationship to him than the relationship with Indigenous peoples. Where do you think that relationship stands now?
Well, nobody's going anywhere. We're all here to stay. How many times have we heard that slogan? So I think every effort that's made in terms of stepping forward to try to make repair, to try to reconcile, to try to have relationships that are built in a meaningful way is a good experience. And so
there are many who are saying that this is all about symbolism, that many of his gestures have been about symbolism and not enough action. What would you say to that?
Well, Justin Trudeau's not been at any of our commission meetings and hasn't participated in any of the decision making, so it would be difficult for me to sort of pin this on our Prime Minister. The fact that this commission may or may not go on and questions may or may not be answered is not the end of it. And we're not the only game in town. These families, the organizations that are working on this, they didn't start because of the commission. They didn't stop because we got going, and they are going to be here long after we're done, and they're not ever going to give up. I have no worry about that.
Thank you for your time, Marilyn.
And joining us right now, the CBC's Duncan McHugh. Duncan, thanks for being here.
Yeah, good to be here.
So based on what Marilyn Poitras had to say, what is your sense of what the biggest challenges will be moving forward?
It's quite something to hear Marilyn Poitras say that Indigenous people have been studied to death and that she's worried that this inquiry will produce nothing more than another study, because that's much the same concern that was raised by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper and the reason that he gave for not wanting to hold an inquiry in the first place. She also had some revealing insights into how this inquiry is making decisions or not making decisions. And initially, the commissioners started by trying to come to consensus, but it was taking too long to make decisions, so then they started to vote. And it seems that there's quite a clash of values. There are some who want a court-like legal process, and then others who want an Indigenous community-building process. And so what we're seeing is that Marilyn Poitras was telling me a story that they tried to convene a circle of elders to help guide the inquiry, and they couldn't even reach a consensus about that.
Right. And so where does the process go from here? I mean, can it proceed without the support of many of the leading Indigenous organizations out there?
Well, the Chief Commissioners and the Minister of Indigenous Affairs say it's full steam ahead, although they both acknowledge that there needs to be a better job of communications. So the inquiry is going to have 2 expert hearings this summer, and then the hearings begin in September in Thunder Bay, 9 hearings in all. But Marilyn Poitras suggested that there are going to be more resignations of staff coming, and that is going to fuel doubt, and it's going to beg the question, is community relations, PR, enough to save an inquiry that seems to be losing the trust of more and more Indigenous organizations?
Duncan, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Well, up next, Trevor Noah weighs in on truth and reconciliation, but not where you might think.
I think a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in America would be amazing. There are still people in America who don't think slavery was as bad as people make it out to be.
Wendy talks politics with The Daily Show host, and he describes his dangerous childhood under apartheid in South Africa.
This is the National News Bulletin, a summary of the day's news.
Even bad news sounded good in those exciting, terrible days when radio news came of age, especially when read by our own voice of doom, Lorne Greene. And Haas was a Colt.
Naval battle in the South Pacific.
Madam, will you please put away that knitting? You're going to have to applaud, you know. Now, let's all relax. Everybody, shall we? Nobody be nervous.
And to balance the glum news from overseas, CBC Radio offered happy-go-lucky fare.
Who's there? It's the Happy Gang. Well, come on in.
It all began in 1901. The discoverer of wireless, Marconi, received his first transatlantic radio message from Signal Hill in Newfoundland.
Hi!
And CBC Radio has been seeing to it that Canada gets the message ever since. In an array of programs from music talk shows like this, ranging through schools and youth, agriculture, religion, serious music, and variety.
A busy place, the CBC, and a big country to serve. How do you suppose all these programs get to all the people spread all over the map?
Well, if you think of the network as a superhighway, then you can picture national program clearance as the traffic cop who keeps things flowing smoothly. National program clearance arranges distribution of our radio and TV programs by landlines and by coast-to-coast microwave network. Just to complicate matters, there are several problems arising out of the different time zones into which the country is divided, not to mention line availability.
Ah, yes, line availability.
I said not to mention that.
Oh, sorry.
A CBC color presentation.
Let's follow an average broadcasting day from the beginning. It's very simple. There's the business of booking studios, getting the slides to telecine, last-minute news inserts, coffee to be ordered, public affairs specials, graphics to be ordered and approved, clear screen projection to be set up, stagehands to be scheduled, coffee to be brought, beats to be lined up, pianos to tune, light bulbs to be replaced, monitors to be serviced, press releases to be issued, coffee to be tasted, props to be picked up, cameras to be fired, shot lists to be typed, rehearsals to be scheduled, contracts to be drawn up, cold coffee to be dumped, memos to be filed.
Hold it, cut!
Cut? The only way this will cut is go back to the beginning.
Sometimes replacing a beloved TV host goes pretty well, like Jimmy Fallon taking over from Jay Leno or Stephen Colbert replacing David Letterman. But for The Daily Show's Trevor Noah, it wasn't so easy at first. Filling the shoes of Jon Stewart was a tall order, and if you think back to the early reviews, they were not kind. But Noah has since found his feet and earned a good measure of respect for carving his own path. Wendy Mesley met Noah late last year when things were really picking up for him. Here again is their conversation.
Does America really need to be the best at everything?
When Trevor Noah started on The Daily Show, he was not exactly a familiar face in North America. But he had been honing his skills on the stand-up comedy scene in the US and back home in South Africa.
If ever this comedy thing doesn't work out, then I've got poverty to fall back on, you know.
His comedy is mined from an extraordinary background. Noah was born and raised during the apartheid era to a black mother and a white father. In those days, being an interracial couple was an actual crime, and a mixed-race child could be taken away, so Noah was often kept indoors. By 1994, apartheid was over. While life was tough, Noah found his way to the stage.
My mom was obviously aspirational. She was like, yeah, I'm going to get a white man, yeah. You know? And then my dad, well, you know how the Swiss love chocolates.
In 2014, he became a correspondent on The Daily Show.
We have the most Dakotas.
You've got so many Dakotas.
Yes.
Well, what is it, North, South, Fanning, Johnson?
Yes.
Leave some Dakota for the rest of us.
Not long after, Jon Stewart called it quits and passed the torch to Noah. At first, criticism was fierce, but he persevered. And like Stewart, it often gets political. Like the interview this past week with an alt-right commentator who likes to compare Black Lives Matter to the Klan.
So when that now becomes the narrative and you're starting to loot, burn, and riot, what did the KKK do?
That is not, look, we'll go around in circles. Did you say, what did the KKK do?
No, what did they do? When you're saying, listen, Trevor.
Wow.
Trevor.
Now, Noah's written a memoir called Born a Crime. I met up with him this week in Toronto.
Trevor, so nice to meet you.
Pleasure meeting you.
So I'm going to ask you about your book in just a moment, I promise, but I've got to ask you about that show that you did recently that's creating this big stink, your interview with the conservative commentator, Tomi Lahren, the one who has famously compared Black Lives Matter to the KKK.
Yes.
Why was it important to have her on your show?
Here's the thing. The conversation everyone seems to be having is, do we live in bubbles? Do we live in a space where We are unable to understand or acknowledge the fact that there are people out there in the world who have views that are very different to us. But the truth is, I think it's more about the bubbles coming together. And so that is me hearing your view and you hearing my view, which is not something that commonly happens. And hearing them and seeing them collide is something that doesn't seem to happen, especially in a manner that's not hateful, in a manner that's not vitriolic. And I think for myself, the question I ask is, how do you then get a conversation started? How do you get it moving? It seems fruitless to some, but I go, well, the other alternative is to stay in those bubbles that you talk about, so why not have a conversation? Let's see where it goes. What do you wish people would understand about you that are in another bubble? What do you wish people would understand about you on the other side?
I wish that we could disagree with each other without thinking that we are bad people or ill-intentioned folks.
That conversation's led to more name-calling of her and of you. Like, why would you have someone who's been called a white supremacist on your show? Can you bring people together?
Here's the thing, I think nothing happens overnight. You know, I think the effects of any interview or any conversation are not things that are immediately apparent. I also don't think that it's something that will automatically change everybody's minds. What I do acknowledge, though, is there may be people who have never tuned into my show who will tune in to see a person who represents them or their views on my show. And maybe in a moment, they will see or hear a point of view from my side that they've never considered because they've never heard it. And maybe vice versa, to hear that from a conservative person and hear them say that this is my point of view.
That interview's created quite a stir, including a headline saying that Trevor Noah finally fills Jon Stewart's shoes. Is that a compliment or an insult? You know what, I understand the sentiment behind it, but the truth is, Jon Stewart left an amazing legacy. It's a legacy that we still feel today. You know, he was a person that came in and created, for all intents and purposes, a genre that has been duplicated all over the world.
I want you to admit that there is such a thing as white privilege. That's all I want.
I knew you were going. But I've come to realize that my purpose is not to fill his shoes. My purpose is to create my own shoes in the shoe factory that he bequeathed to me.
Nice shoes.
Thank you very much.
It's interesting, though, because he really made a name for himself in the mainstream by taking on Fox News, another conservative commentator, as a blowhard. And now you're creating such a stir with this. So is that the role of comedians these days? It seems to have changed.
I don't think it's changed at all. When you think about the role of comedians and stand-ups, essentially what comedians have always been is people who are outsiders looking in and saying, that's ridiculous, how is that normal, how do you hold those views, this is the logical flaw within what you are saying. And when you approach that from a satirical news point of view or from a news parody show, then those views that you are talking about will invariably come from the media. They will come from spaces where people are broadcasting their views. Because I can't go after a random person on Twitter. That's bullying. That's me using a platform that's higher than theirs to engage with them. But if there is someone who's getting millions and millions of views who shares that, you now have an opportunity to engage in a discussion and to try and break down the flaws that you believe to be there in somebody else's argument using comedy. And that's really what comedy is.
We have to take a short break, but we have more with Trevor Noah when we come back. What it was like growing up in apartheid-era South Africa.
In order for people to understand the world I grew up in, you have to understand how meticulous apartheid was. I was considered superior to my mother and half of my family, and inferior to my father and the other half of my family.
It has been a wet and deadly 36 hours in northeastern Quebec.
All day, local radio has been warning people in dozens of specific areas to leave their homes. And if they can't drive out, signal helicopters flying overhead so they can be flown out.
At least 7 people are dead, several more are missing, and thousands more have been forced to flee.
A minister in the Quebec government described the situation in this region as apocalyptic, catastrophic. For more than a day, torrents of water have crashed through villages, towns, and cities, taking houses, in some cases entire buildings, with it.
Like clockwork, every 5 minutes a helicopter lands, bringing refugees from the flood. This is what they're escaping. Hundreds of homes drowning in mud, hanging by a thread, or giving in to the relentless river. No one knows how many bridges and roads have collapsed, and the landmarks wiped out. This old pulp mill reopened as a museum just 2 weeks ago. Now it's a $6 million write-off.
This disaster is unprecedented in Canada, and so is the Relief Fund, the largest ever collected by the Red Cross. The money has come from people all over the country, and this region knows it.
C'est des choses de même que tout le monde nous aide, puis tu sais, faut voir ça pour croire ça, là.
Same with the destruction. The cars buried under mud, the homes swept out into the river, whole neighborhoods gone. That one house with the now famous foundation that alone resisted. Things people here will never forget, their disaster and the charity of others.
Good evening. It's official now. The F-18A has won the fighter plane contract.
The winning McDonnell Douglas 18A will cost $15 million a copy and is almost certain to be a highly controversial buy.
General Dynamics, makers of the F-16 and the losing company in this competition, has issued a statement saying the benefits it offered were higher than the government gave it credit for, and that the price of the plane the government has bought will go up because of continued problems with it.
For all of its weaponry, the toughest battle the F-18 Hornet may ever have to face is the barrage of poor publicity it's now attracting. Its costs have been climbing, and some media reports have described the Hornet as a lemon. Earlier this year, the U.S. General Accounting Office blasted the plane. It was nearly a ton overweight, its undercarriage was faulty, it had problems of drag, reduced engine thrust, range, and its acceleration was below specifications.
Canada now has nearly 40 of them and expects to buy 100 more. Each of them costs $30 to $40 million. Today it was revealed that the CF-18 and its American cousins in the United States Navy have the same problem. Cracks have started to appear in the tail section when the fighter does the combat maneuvers it was designed to do.
It's a relatively minor problem. It's one that is readily identifiable. The cause is known.
This latest fault is sure to add to the criticisms of those people who felt that Canada should have bought many more of a competing aircraft, a fighter that came with a much lower price tag.
Do you need a little life in your life?
Looking for the best in home, decor, food, health, and style? Check us out at cbc.ca/life.
Whether it's relationship advice, DIYs, or fantastic recipes.
It's all there.
And recipes.
Yeah.
We mentioned it.
Good.
You grew up in racist hell of apartheid South Africa, and now you're in America as it's all a different version of racism is getting stirred up. How different is it?
The biggest differences I feel are that I grew up at the end of an era. I grew up during the final years of apartheid, and I think the biggest difference in the US that I feel is because there is an inverse relationship in terms of the majority versus the minority. In South Africa, black people are the majority, and so it is a lot easier for a nation to reckon with its past. It's a lot easier for a nation to dictate how it feels people should talk about these things. We had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, which was important because it was a place and a time when South Africans had to sit down, watch their television screens every single night and hear about how a government had oppressed and murdered and segregated an entire swath of a nation.
You want Americans to have that kind of conversation?
It would be amazing, wouldn't it? I think a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in America would be amazing. There are still people in America who don't think slavery was as bad as people make it out to be. There are people who say, was it that bad? At least they had food. At least they knew they had a job. And you're like, is that a job if there's no payment involved? You know, and to have people question that, to have people question the origins of a country. Whenever I hear people saying the phrase, they go, that's not what America was founded on. I go, but that's not really true. You can say that's not what America aspires to, and that is really beautiful to have aspirations, but you cannot deny that the very foundations of the United States of America are based on segregating and oppressing and a racism that has gone through time. And once you acknowledge that, I feel like you have a better chance to aspire to step out of it.
I'm going to talk about your book. Your mom sounds like entirely fearless.
She really is. She's really fearless or crazy, one of the two. I move between the two ideas, but yeah, she's a really amazing woman who I think I've only grown to fully appreciate, and maybe even not yet, as I've gotten older, and obviously through writing the book about our lives together.
She had relations with your dad, who was white. That was illegal. That was an actual crime. You
Yes.
were an actual crime.
Yes, I was born a crime. I was a product of a crime that my parents had committed. I lived in a country where black and white people were not allowed to get married, nor were they allowed to, as the law said, have carnal intercourse with each other. And these were laws that were punishable by jail time. So that was the world I grew up in.
And she got caught a few times in white neighborhoods and went to jail.
Yeah, my mom, she always laughs about it, and that's why I go, she's amazing, and she's also maybe a little bit insane. But she genuinely jokes about it. She says, oh, honey, I went to jail, but that was part of my world. I accepted it, and I knew I was fighting against something, and so I accepted that this would be a part of my world. And so my mom would get arrested on occasion.
And she'd hide you?
She would, yeah. She would hide me. My grandmother would have to hide me.
Because people would see you and go, you're illegal?
Well, people would understand that I'm out of place. So in order for people to understand the world I grew up in, you have to understand how meticulous apartheid was. Imagine a world where it's not just black or white, it's every single shade that is separated into a different category, and every single category has its own benefits and different liberties that have been removed. And I grew up in a world where, as crazy as it sounds, I was considered superior to my mother and half of my family, and inferior to my father and the other half of my family. And so, because I grew up with my black family in Soweto, because I grew up as a part of that world, if I was seen by the wrong person or if I was spotted by the wrong police, then I could have easily been taken away from my family, because that would not have been allowed. I was not allowed to exist in the space that I was in.
When you started on the Daily Show as the host, there was a lot of pushback, and you even got responses from people saying, go back to Africa. And these are like Daily Show viewers. What did you think of that?
You know, I was shocked by that, honestly. And I think I've come to learn very quickly how we use, you know, the cudgels of racism and xenophobia when it suits us in the world. We all have that tendency. Some of us are better than others, but even people who would consider themselves completely liberal and progressive, you will find at times betray a moment where they don't accept, a moment of intolerance. And I'll never forget a message someone sent me. It was, because it was so funny and so powerful. He said to me, you will never replace Jon Stewart, brings Jon Stewart back, go back to Djibouti. And I thought, if you are truly a fan of Jon Stewart, then wouldn't you subscribe to the world that he subscribed to? You know, I was like, he's the person who brought me to the show. I did not pluck myself from obscurity, he did. And so I go, so you are inherently in that moment saying, I trust Jon Stewart's judgments, I trust how smart he is as a human being, except when it comes to this decision. And we do that as people. Change is something we're resistant to.
So are you trying to fit in? Do you want to fit in?
No, I've never been good at fitting in. Like, if I fit in, I fail, you know? So my life has been a series of exclusions. My life has been a constant journey of being an outsider. And I've come to learn that being an outsider is my greatest gift.
It's been so lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Trevor.
Thank you.
Well, if you enjoyed Wendy's interview with Trevor Noah, we've got more great conversations on our YouTube channel. Just head to youtube.com/CBC The National. Well, coming up, movie fans mourn an Oscar-winning actor and a groundbreaking director. We're back after this.
But for another category of goods that has transformed our world, the gadgets or the tools of the electronic media. Here are some film projectors, the movies. I wonder what it really means, though, to be able to flick a switch and to bring in any part of the world, to see the most personal relationships of mankind acted out before us. It's so easy, isn't it? A handy, instantaneous gadget. The tape recorder. Small, portable, can go and has gone everywhere. India, just a button's push away. Space means nothing. With a record collection, neither space nor time matter. We can, all of us, share in everything from anywhere and any time. Well, back to box day with the flick of a wrist. Fabian, Frankie Avalon, the voice of FDR, Petrushka, the music of Arabia, the sound of a sports car race in Florida. Even the most Puritan among us engages now each and every day in an absolute Roman carnival of the senses. There are new sights, new sounds, new fabrics, new textures. Well, we're all dedicated libertines. And radio. Well, we've heard the sound of symphonies, of riots, and of battles, and all without leaving the living room. And now, radio goes with us to beach parties. Or to the baseball games. And each of us with our own private slice of the modern age. We're never out of touch. And television? Well, I wonder who really knows what it means to have pouring into our homes day after day the cowboys, the rock and roll singers, the statesmen, the philosophers, the whole debate of our modern world. Well, surely our sense of space, of time, of cause and effect must be changing. And our attitudes to life and love, to religion, politics, and leisure, what of them? Oh, I almost forgot. The telephone. We can afford to take it for granted because it's been around so long. Surely, though, our sense of space, of distance, the relationship of person from person no longer means what it did. And you'll notice that the image of the telephone goes with the teenager, because he's the only one completely at home using it. And he uses it all the time. That's annoying, isn't it, to be held up even 5 minutes? Must be a teenager on the other end. Well, there they are. Our new electronic media, or our new gadgets. You push a button, and the world's yours. You know how they talk about the world getting smaller? Well, it's thanks to these that it is. Everywhere is now our own neighborhood. We know what it's like to go on safari in Kenya, or to have an audience with the Pope, to order a cognac in a Paris cafe. But not only is the world getting smaller, it's becoming more available and more familiar to our minds and to our emotions. The world is now a global village.
Marin Cilic never had a chance. It took Roger Federer just 1 hour and 45 minutes to clinch his 8th Wimbledon title. He's now won the grass court Grand Slam more than any man in history, and it capped 2 weeks of pretty spectacular play. The whole time, he didn't drop a single set. Well, Oscar-winning actor Martin Landau has died at age 89. You might remember his rise to fame in 1966 in the TV series Mission Impossible, but it was his later film career that sealed his reputation as a first-rate dramatic actor. His portrayal of Bela Lugosi in Ed Wood won him the Best Supporting Actor Oscar in 1995. Filmmaker George Romero has also died, and he leaves quite the legacy. His Night of the Living Dead is said to have reinvented the zombie genre, and we all know how that's taken off. But Romero's zombies carried a social message about class or race in the US. He actually dismissed the Walking Dead series as a soap opera. Romero died in Toronto today at the age of 77 after a battle with lung cancer. And that's The National for this Sunday night. I'm Andrew Chang. Thank you so much for watching. For some of you, local news is coming up right now. And for news at any hour, you can always go to our website, cbcnews.ca. Take care.